This video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you need a website or domain, visit squarespace.com. Hey everyone, and welcome to a new video. As photographers, we come to realize over time that light is our most precious resource. Its quality and quantity dictate all our equipment choices, settings, and greatly impact our results. The problem is we often need just the right amount of light. Too much is a problem, and too little is a problem too. This can turn some of us into light snobs. That is, photographers who only go out when the light is perfect. Last week I made a video on shooting in harsh light, the too much end of the spectrum. This week's video is about the not enough light problem. That is, shooting in bad or low light and how to get great results even if the light is downright awful. That's because I feel if our photography strategy is to only go out in the best light, it not only limits how often we can go out, but limits our creativity if our only goal is to get that perfect shot. Great photos don't all need to be about amazing image quality. Don't forget to stay for my bonus tip where I'll explain how I got this photo in low light with a $400 camera. My name is Simon d'Entremont and I make weekly videos giving you photo tips or taking you behind the scenes for wildlife and nature photography. Subscribe if you want to see more. Now, most of us have noticed in the past that when the light is low, like indoors or in dark environments like music venues, or outside when it's dark and gray and gloomy, our photos don't come out very nice. Let's look at why bad light is bad for photo quality and often yields poor results, even for professional photographers. First, low light, which is usually reflected in the use of higher and higher ISOs, leads to noisy images. Noise robs our photos of both sharpness and contrast, as they muddy up the photo details. Second, colors are muted in low light, as our cameras are actually recording light reflecting in from our subjects. In low light, the light bouncing off our subjects is dull and flat, so that's what we record. And third, in low light, our camera records a lower dynamic range than in good light, and in a still properly exposed photo, reduces the darkness of our darks and the highlights of our lights. This makes the photos look dull and flat. So let's get the fundamentals straight here. To solve the issue of shooting in low light, we need to get more light onto our sensor. There are only 3 ways to do this, and no, a higher ISO isn't one of them. Getting more light on your sensor comes from one of the following: longer shutter speeds, larger apertures, or brighter subjects. ISO is just a volume knob or gain on your camera to brighten the exposure after the photo is taken. If that sounds confusing, you can see my video on that right here, but make sure you come back. If I show you this sample photo of my owl model shot in dark conditions, you'll see that it looks pretty bad. My ISO is 51,200. Lack of contrast, lack of details, and muted colors. Yuck. We need more light on our subject and on our camera sensor to fix this. Here are some tips. The first tip is to get more light onto our sensor using longer shutter speeds. The longer the shutter is open, the more light that comes in, improving the quality of our photo. Doubling the duration of the shutter speed will double the amount of light. Doubling again will quadruple the amount of light. Notice that if I increase the length of the shutter speed to here, dropping the ISO here, the owl looks much better as the colors, clarity, and sharpness have all improved, even if nothing has changed in the scene. But there are a few tricks to make this work. First, if your scene is very dark, the shutter speeds needed to get lots of light on your subject may be long, like over a second. That makes hand-holding, even with image-stabilized sensors, very difficult. That means using a tripod, one of the most helpful tools in low-light photography. Set up your camera on the tripod and use the 2-second timer to get the sharpest possible image. This minimizes any shake by you pressing the shutter button. Second, there's an associated issue with using a tripod and slow shutter speeds, and that's that you can't have moving targets while you're using long exposure times. Your subject will move while the shutter is open, creating blur in your photo. Now, while this can be used creatively in lots of ways, most of us want our subjects to be sharp in our photos. As such, the tripod strategy is best used on static or very slow moving targets. Landscapes, waterfalls, architecture, or product photography are examples. Here's a couple of extra tricks to make this work. First, if you're photographing a person and using a tripod and very slow shutter speeds, ask them to stay very still for the shot. If they stand still enough, even at 1 second, even if you need to try a few attempts, you can get a sharp photo. Secondly, the longer the focal length you use, or the closer you stand to your subject, the faster things move around in the field of view. So use a wider focal length or stand farther back from your subject and movement will be less apparent. So shoot a photo of a person that fills the frame with a 35mm lens rather than shoot a head and shoulder shot at 85mm, for example. The movement will be less and less risk of blur in your photo. And also turn on lens and sensor stabilization if you have it. It will allow for sharper photos with longer shutter speeds, but note that it won't freeze subject movement, just camera movement. The next way to get more light on your sensor is to shoot at wider apertures, that is, smaller f numbers on the aperture settings of your lens. This opens up the diaphragm of your lens, allowing more light. For a given shutter speed, opening the lens aperture by one stop will double the amount of light on your sensor. So shoot a lens at f4 rather than f5.6, or at f2.8 rather than f4. Here's a shot of my owl buddy shot at f1.6 versus f8 I started with. Note that this is over 20 times more light, a huge difference. The image has much more clarity and details and just looks better. Now this choice comes with a trade-off, as all exposure settings on a camera seems to have. If you shoot at a wide aperture, you will have a thinner depth of field. That is, the part of the photo in focus will be thin. If you want that look with a blurry background, which is popular in portraits or wildlife for example, no problem. But if you're shooting a landscape or a group of people and you want everything in focus, this strategy will have drawbacks, as everything in the photo may not be in focus. There are some workarounds though. In landscapes, if you're handy with Photoshop, you can use a technique called focus stacking. That's where you take photographs of various parts of the image with a thin depth of field, but merge the various parts of the image together in Photoshop to make the whole image in focus. That's what I did in this photo of sunflowers and the Milky Way. I needed to shoot them all at a very wide open aperture so I could freeze the flowers moving in the wind, as well as get enough light for the Milky Way, which is very dim. So one shot of my image was focused here, another here, and another here. I merged them all together to make this final image. I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. I use Squarespace to make my very own website, and it was really easy. They have lots of templates to choose from, or you can customize pages with easy drag and drop sections for photos, clickable buttons, text, or links. When I recently added a new wildlife photography course to my offerings, it was easy to add a new page to my website with photos, videos, or drop-in text boxes wherever I wanted one. You can even get people to subscribe to your newsletter and offer them a free download in return if you wish. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Simon to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. If you're shooting a group of people or other subjects in poor light with a wide open aperture, remember that your depth of field is thin. As such, try to get everyone lined up on the same plane so they're all being focused at the same time. Rather than having people front and back, line them up side to side. Note also that on many zoom lenses, the aperture is larger at the wide end than at the zoomed in end. So shoot wider and you can get more light in with those types of lenses. Now, once you've lengthened the shutter speed as much as you can and still get a sharp photo, or you've opened up the aperture as much as you can, there's only one way left to get more photons onto your sensor, and that's for your subject to be brighter. For subjects that can move, like your portrait model, your car, or your kids, getting them to better light is an option. If they're in the really dark shade, like an underground parking lot, get them to the brighter edge of the parking lot, maybe exposed to some reflected light from the outside. Or take them outside to a brighter location. If you're indoors, bring them to a window and get some light from the outside. But don't shoot them standing as a silhouette at the window. Go off to one side along one wall and get the light on the side of their faces coming from the window. If your location is fixed, try adding some light. Reflectors are often used in portrait photography, bouncing some natural light from a window or sunlight onto your subject. Try the silver side for cool light, the golden side for warmer tones. Of course, flashes are a great way to add light to a dark scene. A few tips though. If you overflash your subject in a dark scene, it just doesn't look natural. Less is often more. Just fill in the shadows more than illuminate something that was dark to start with. Bouncing your flash from a side or a ceiling is also a great strategy to soften the light and not get those dreaded red eyes, although lots of image processing programs can fix this for you. Another light source is an LED panel, like this one. Getting one where you can adjust the color temperature, that is the white balance, is a great feature. That way you can adjust it to fit the scene. Many have a way to attach it to a small tripod so you can have it at an angle, which is often much nicer than head-on. Just a quick note that if you sign up for my email list, I'll send you a free guide on how to shoot in backlit situations. Link in the description below. So let's say you've tried all those things and you're stuck with what you've got. That's often my situation as a wildlife photographer. When photographing foxes right after sunset, for example, I may use 1/200th of a second shutter speed, the bare minimum I can get sharp photos with, and I can't ask the fox to stand still for a second. I also shoot my lens wide open at f4, which is as wide as it gets. And I don't use flash on foxes for ethical reasons. So I have two options: shoot less than perfect image quality photos or go home. Up to ISO 12,800, I keep shooting. But when I get home, my photos need some work to look their best. A few tips. First, don't over-sharpen your noisy photos in processing. You're just sharpening the noise and making it look worse. If your processing software has a feature to select the subject, like Lightroom, use that to select the subject and only sharpen the subject, and that just a bit. Don't make it crunchy looking. And don't sharpen the background where the noise is more easily visible. Rather, select the background if you can, and add noise reduction more aggressively there. Even if you don't want to overly fuss with complex processing techniques and just want to add noise reduction to your photo, it's perfectly fine to do that. In Lightroom, which I use a lot, just slide the noise reduction slider until the noise is cleaned up, but not so much that the detail in your subject is all gone. I also use third-party software like Topaz products that are great for removing noise without losing too much detail in your photo, all in one step. Another tip for noisy images from poor light is don't overcrop your images. The more you zoom in on the noise, the worse it looks. Like in this example. Keep your crops wider and find compositions that don't need to be cropped later. The more you can use the whole image, the better. And finally, many photos shot in poor light lack dynamic range, that is, the differences in tones from lights to darks. You can add some life back into these photos by lowering the blacks a bit, raising the whites a bit, and adding some contrast. That will make the photo look like it has a wider range of tones in the photo, giving it some new life. For my next tip, just like I said in my video on shooting in harsh light, the same tip applies to shooting in bad light. Embrace it. Turn it into a positive. In low light and fast action, you can use the blur of movement as a creative tool. Let the subject move in the frame and get a sense of action. Shoot cars with slow shutter speeds to make them look like they're going fast. Or let the water move in a waterfall or a seascape photo to add some action to an otherwise static target. Or shoot fireworks on a tripod for 3 or 4 seconds to get some nice movement. And if you shoot 3 or 4 second exposures of aurora, take hundreds of shots of them using an intervalometer and stitch them together to make a time lapse, like I did here. While in my videos I usually don't try to instill in you the desire to buy more gear, my motto is use what you have. If you really want to get good photos of a situation that's important to you, like your kid's basketball in a gym, what should you do? Many people will suggest to get a new camera. I actually think a new lens is more often the answer if you want to buy gear for low light photography. Larger aperture lenses can allow for much more light and will often add sharpness to your photos over the kit lens that came with your camera. And buying used lenses is also okay, as they usually last a long time and keep their value well, as the technology refresh cycle is much slower than for camera bodies. A 70-200 f2.8, for example, is a great lens in a dark gym or for weddings in a dark church or hall. Or for indoor portraits, most manufacturers make an inexpensive 50mm f1.8, usually called the Nifty 50, an amazing lens for the money. Or for Milky Ways, I use an f1.4 lens that lets in 8 times more light than f4. I use that, plus a tripod, to get shots like these. And to give you an extreme example, you put a $15,000 lens like this on a $400 camera and you can get this shot like this shot of mine. Sure, the cheaper M50 camera I bought used didn't have the dynamic range of my full frame, so this little spot on the breast was blown out. So shoot me. The point is, a great lens can turn an average camera into an amazing one. If the topic of noisy images has you intrigued, check out my video on digital image noise, what creates it, and how to control it, which you can check out right here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and YouTube will share it with other photographers struggling with bad light. And I hope you can go out the very next outing in bad light and still come home with great images. I know you can do it.